access to cameras is a major generational difference. And I think the idea that Gen Z sort of takes for granted, like, yeah, I'm going to be on camera all the time, is a very different approach where there is a lot less self-consciousness around, like, oh my God, here I am.
Well, I appreciate you doing this. This is about you and your journey in music. We'll talk about the EP, and yeah, that's cool with you.
Awesome. Yeah.
Sweet. So first up, where were you born and raised?
New York City.
New York City. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Not many people from the actual city, I would bet.
Yeah. I learned how to drive last year.
No way.
Yeah. I was a lifelong pedestrian, and now I am honestly, like, I do love driving. I expected to hate it. I expected just because, like, as a lifelong passenger, like, you expect driving to suck if all you witness is just the person next to you being like, this traffic, or like,
right.
Look at that guy, use your signal or whatever. But I feel like you don't get to enjoy the fun of driving, which is oh, look, I can make myself go fast.
Right.
I'm having a great time driving.
Are you in LA?
Yeah.
And you have a great time driving. That's interesting. I'm from San Diego and recently moved to Nashville, but like even going back to my sister got married and going back and having to drive again in California and San Diego and LA. And I'm like, oh, this is a lot. So the fact that you're learning in like the probably most difficult place.
That's interesting, because I actually, like, I kind of feel like first of all, like, yes, people are right. Like, LA drivers are unhinged, but I do feel like the complaint I have always heard isn't like LA drivers are crazy. It's like LA traffic is terrible. And I feel like Angelinos are so spoiled coming from New York City, where like if you get in a cab to go a mile, it's going to take you like 15 minutes. Whereas in LA, like, even with traffic, you got at max like an 8-minute mile. So
you're still moving a little bit. Whereas in New York, it's just stopped in traffic lights, and at least there's some sort of highways and stuff you can get on.
Yeah, and I mean, the great thing about being from New York is like you don't have to be in that traffic if you don't want to. I mean, you've got great public transit and everything's so walkable. But in terms of traffic versus traffic, there's no contest. The traffic in New York is like I never, ever, ever want to drive in New York City. I love driving in LA.
Yeah, that's funny. I think you're the first person I've ever talked to that said, I really actually enjoy driving in LA.
I mean, in fairness, once I start driving anywhere else, I'll probably be like, man, driving in LA sucks. But it's like,
it's all you know right now.
Someone who has only seen one movie and being like, yeah, that movie's pretty good. Like, well, I haven't seen a second movie, but yeah, like I'm pretty sure that's one of the best movies ever made.
Right. That's so funny. So growing up in New York, do you come from musical household at all?
Not even the slightest. There is, I would say nobody in my family is musical. My grandma she loves like Cole Porter and will like incorrigibly like start singing and like never ever stop if you just set her off. But like I wouldn't particularly describe her as like a musical person or a person with an interest in the making of music, just kind of an enjoyer of 40s songwriting.
Yeah. And where did you start? Did you play piano or anything? Like what kind of drew you to music early on?
I took piano lessons in grade school and like totally didn't take to it. I always had like a keyboard in my room growing up, and I would play around with it and like have fun with it a bit, but like I never, it wasn't something that was like a main interest of mine until I learned about like music creation software when I was in, probably 7th or 8th grade.
Would you get like Fruity Loops or Ableton or something? Or
what? It was Cakewalk Studio. That's what it was. It was like an OG like Windows 90s piece of software.
Yeah, I know that one.
Yeah, yeah. And I was learning Cakewalk, and I thought like, oh my God, this is so cool. I can program a piano part that is much better than I'm capable of playing it. And that got me more and more interested to making it on my own. Then when I found Logic, it was like, oh my God, game over. I love this. Like, this is so fun. And I'd always enjoyed singing. Like, I had a band in high school. We were called Murray's Fury because one of us had prank called some kid's dad whose name was Murray. He got really mad at us. We were Murray's Fury. And we never even wrote our own stuff. Like, it was the kind of high school band where it's like, sick, let's play Immigrant Song at the next assembly. Like, it wasn't, we were.
That's a choice though. I mean, Immigrant Song. It wasn't like, yeah, we're going to play, Damn It from Blink-182 or something maybe a little simpler.
Yeah, no, I think part of it is like the one of us that we were a three-piece. It was me on bass or piano. We had a guitarist and a drummer. And our guitarist was just the one who like knew the most music, and he was obsessed with classic rock. So we played like a lot of kind of like harder classic rock songs. And I remember our final gig was actually my graduation, but our second to last gig was a nightmare because there was no ground wire. And whenever I was touching or close enough to both the microphone and the strings of the bass guitar, I was actively being electrocuted.
Like, shocked.
Yeah.
Oh,
and so I had on these big yellow kitchen gloves while I was playing, these big rubber gloves, so that I wouldn't get shocked. And like, but there's a lot of bass in Immigrants, like doom do 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 doom do do.
Yeah.
There's a lot to do, and I ripped through those gloves like immediately. It was that was one for the books. But
was there any photos of that of you playing in the rubber gloves? That's got to be that'd be a great picture.
Yeah, I do. And it's like, and also at that point I hadn't learned like what haircuts might look nice for me, so I had this like ridiculous like a version of Bob Dylan that played a lot of Magic the Gathering hair. So it's definitely it's a memorable photo. But in spite of that, I wasn't positive that music was what I wanted to do. I was interested in like animation and cartoons. Like, that was one of the things I was doing on my own for a while, was animating in like Macromedia Flash.
Okay.
And just like little, the kind of stuff that was sort of like everywhere on the internet if you were a teenager at the time, like stick figures fighting each other and stuff like that. And music was like a passion, but it wasn't the thing. When I was applying to schools, I didn't have like a specific thing I was going for. Music was one of them. I applied and got into Berkeley, but didn't go because
wow.
Yeah, the girl.
So you were like a legitimately, to say that you didn't want to pursue music and then get into Berkeley, it wasn't like you just screwed around and then like, maybe I'll take music.
I saw it as a possible path, but I wasn't like, I'm all in on music, because I applied basically to 3 different schools for 3 different things. Well, at 4, I applied to NYU and I didn't get in. But I applied to Berkeley to be, I think it was either a composer or songwriter. I don't remember the difference in terms of the Berkeley, admission thing. I applied to the new school with my application basically saying I'm a graphic designer. And I applied to SUNY Purchase because at the time I was dating a girl who she desperately wanted to be in the music program at SUNY Purchase. And that was where she applied, and the only place she applied. And I was like, oh my God, if we're gonna be together forever, then
of course.
I need to go to Purchase. But they had closed music applications at that point. So I applied there as a playwright. And what ended up happening is I was like, you know what, I gotta choose based on my heart. So I picked SUNY Purchase, joined the playwriting program, and then the girl I was dating got waitlisted, and we almost immediately broke up. So, but I
So you're
at that
into
point,
the school and you're only going there because of her, and
yeah.
then she's not even in yet. And
But at
so do
that
you
point,
stay?
like, I picked a path, and I was like,
Okay.
okay, writing. I made my choice. Writing is the thing I'm doing, and for the next like 10 years, predominantly, I was like a writer, screenwriter, and music really only came back in through comedy, because I started trying to get into the like sketch comedy scene in New York. I did stand up for a minute and wasn't very good at it, but
Wow.
I
That's
ended up.
something I've always been really interested in. I'm not funny enough to get up there and do stand
It's
up, but
it's scary, like I think sketch comedy was always so much more comfortable for me, just because if you're not good up there, like the sketch is bad. But if you're not good up there as a stand-up, then it's like you are bad. You are not
right.
funny. Go home. So I definitely was always more comfortable like collaborating with people, working with people. I had a comedy band that we still do stuff on and off, called Sam and Bill. And we actually started doing better. We released a record that hit briefly #1 in the Amazon sales of like comedy records.
Damn.
And we started playing more around the country, and that was really the thing that got me into songwriting again. Like, I hadn't looked back and been like, oh, I'm going to do more of this, I'm going to compose more music, until I started doing it for the sake of comedy. And I'm glad I got into it that way. I think if I had just gone directly the Berkeley route, first of all, I think I would have become a much more irritating person to spend time with. And that is not to say that of any of my dear friends who went to Berkeley, but I feel like, a version of me that knows that much about music theory would just be obnoxious. So I'm glad I don't. I don't know. I think getting into music kind of diagonally was really an advantage, because I think there are so many people who like music is the one thing that they've really been focusing on, and I think kind of coming into it as a multi-hyphenate helped me have some perspectives that they might not have, and it's helped me work with people who are lifelong musicians, because then like they can take their perspective and I can take mine, and we can find kind of a cool in-between place.
Yeah, I mean, because you come from so many different like little backgrounds. I mean, to do comedy, like to want to do stand up, and want to write sketches, and then able to use that because you're a musician, you could write that into your comedy. Or it sounds like you did animation, and like your videos online, you're animated, and you've done cartoon voiceover work, like all these things that kind of allowed you to pave your own really unique path.
Yeah, I mean, that was interesting too. Like, we didn't even talk about the voiceover thing. Like, I think one of the things they say about LA is that like New Yorkers have a very good time acclimating to LA, just because like when you're on that kind of New York pace, it's so easy to get comfortable in SoCal and just be like, man, the lifestyle here is great. Like, I'm situated, I'm just going to kind of like stick with where I am. And I think there's like a weird poison inside of every New Yorker that is like, no, not enough, gotta work. And
which isn't a bad thing. I mean, to have that drive, obviously.
Yeah, totally. I think that was compounded by the fact that I was like acting freelance to pay the bills. And like, I wasn't making it out the gate either. Like, I worked in restaurants and catering and whatnot, but that certainly by like my mid to late 20s, I was basically supporting myself entirely as a voiceover artist, which was like, was an incredible way to have time to start developing comedy and to start developing songwriting through comedy.
Mm-hmm. Were you doing, and that came later. So you started the comedy band and you had the, the touring under your belt and the record on Amazon, and you were still living in New York at the time?
Yeah. I actually only moved to LA just before the pandemic.
Oh, okay. Wow. So that was kind of a big thing for you then for what, a number of years, the comedy thing?
Absolutely. And, I still have, a lot of dear friends that I met from that scene. It's interesting, like the people that stick with it really do have a tendency to, make it whatever making it is. But I think there came a point too, particularly around the time that I stopped doing stand-up at all, when I got back to that same kind of crossroads moment where I was like, well, what does my future look like as a comic versus my future at that time as a writer? And I really consciously made the choice, like, I'm going to invest my time and effort into like growing as a writer and a storyteller instead of just being the best stand-up I can be. Because I also saw my peers and I saw how good so many of them are, and how I always had a much easier time writing the jokes than delivering them. And
interesting. Okay.
I just thought, like, I'll focus on the part of this job that I really feel like I can excel at, rather than the part of it that I'm doing just to kind of feel a part of something, a part of the comedy community.
Okay. And when you got to LA, what took you then to Los Angeles?
Well, it was a combination of things. At the time as a writer, I was taking a lot more meetings in LA. And I was just, at the time we moved, I had just sold a web series to Funny or Die. And
Damn.
that was a thing that was going to make me be in LA for a period of time anyway. And then my wife, who is an entertainment lawyer and an incredibly talented one, she's so good. I always got to say that. And she had just left a job in New York, and one of her most promising offers was in LA. And we had also just had a kid, and he was about 2 months old at the time. And there was just this thought of like, we are living in a, 300 square foot 2-bedroom apartment in New York. It's like, are we going to raise a kid here? I have opportunities out west. You have opportunities out west. And it just kind of all came together.
Wow. Well, when did you start Living Tombstone? You've had that channel for a while.
Tombstone. I joined Tombstone.
You joined Living Tombstone.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And that was a big part of the evolution of what I was doing as a songwriter, from being like, oh, let me do this to make people laugh, to like, let me do this to make people vibe, I guess.
Okay.
At the time, right after we released that comedy record that did well, I got introduced to this guy, Yoav. I was at a going away party for a friend of mine that I knew through voiceover work, who she was moving down to the Dallas area where there's a lot of anime that gets produced and recorded down there. So this was her, going away party. And at that going away party, which was a karaoke party, I met Yoav, who had been in the United States for less than a week at this point. And I should add, this girl whose going away party it was, Brittany, our only mutual friend. So this was like the only time we ever could have met, because Brittany was leaving to go to Dallas like in 2 days.
Yeah, so you both knew her, and you're both at this going away party.
Yes, it truly the only opportunity Yoav and I would have ever had in our entire lives to meet each other. And so we end up just kind of sitting next to each other in this karaoke room talking about music. He tells me he just moved to New York. And we talked about the idea of getting like a studio space together where we could both work on music around each other, be kind of accountable to each other by having someone else in the room being productive so that we wouldn't just kind of goof off all day.
Mhm.
And from there, we ended up like going for it. And within a month, we had a studio space that we were both going to easily 4 or 5 days a week. And from there, I mean, you know, he's working 15 feet from me and I'm working 15 feet from him, and he hears what I'm doing. I hear what he's doing. He gives me a note. I give him a note. And pretty soon we were just collaborating on everything we did.
Oh, wow. And then so he was working on the YouTube channel, and then you kind of just jumped in because it made sense. You guys were right there, and
Yeah. Yeah. The first song that like we really sat down and said, like, let's make this be like our song. And this song is kind of like an opportunity to really creatively partner on something. It was a song called My Ordinary Life. And that song is actually our first song to go platinum. And so it's like that, it was just so well received, and it turned out so well that there was just this moment that we had where we're like, well, we need to keep writing together. And like from that moment on, like we've just been writing partners, you know, like we like virtually all the music that we do, if we're not writing it together, the other person's listening to it and being like, oh man, that's cool, maybe try this. Like we've just been kind of like creative partners in music from then on. And then around 2018, 2017 or 2018, I think it was 2018, I came to another, you know, multi-hyphenate crossroads where one of my, like, I had just left a manager in the like TV and film world, and I was feeling just like it was feeling like I wasn't sure if I had time to do both. And you know, I had this moment where I was like, you know what, let me go all in on music, and haven't looked back.
Wow. Wow. And then because you're still doing a lot of stuff for that YouTube channel, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like we're still releasing stuff. Last year we released a lot of stuff. This year, you know, we're working on the next, you know, full length LP for the Living Tombstone. So like this year's like a development year, whereas last year was kind of like a releasing year.
Okay. And during all of these things that you're doing, you have your own solo record.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me when you start working on Bad Times.
So Bad Times was in many ways like the product of me trying to figure out how to be a producer.
Okay.
Because, you know, in terms of the creative partnership between Yoav and I for the Living Tombstone, Yoav he's so technical. He also uses different software than I do. I use Logic and he uses FL Studio. And he's very much like, he's like a technical producer and mixer and like really brilliant in that regard. And it occurred to me that I'm like, I don't even need to, you know, like there are muscles that I'm just not flexing entirely because I don't have to produce for TLT. And then there was just a sense of like, what would I write about on my own? What would I produce on my own? What would it sound like? And Bad Times is in part, you know, me trying to answer those questions. And as you can already hear so far, like I've had a hard time in my life, like figuring out like, what am I? You know what I mean? Like, what is my identity? Is it like a writer? Is it a comedian? Is it a musician? So I think part of it too is figuring out what my identity is as a solo recording artist, and trying to infuse, I mean, in this case, some of the bad times into a real sense of like, I don't know, into a signature, into a declaration of like, this is who I am musically.
Okay. And because it's the EP is done, it doesn't come out I think till end of next month. And so when you're working on that, like, you obviously have to put a different hat on. I mean, you have so many projects going on. Like, when you're working on that, like, you must approach that totally differently than you would anything with Living Tombstone.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I think, there's the I've always used, to an extent, I've always used collaboration as a crutch,
Uh-huh.
where it's so easy to bounce stuff off someone else and like collectively put together the jigsaw puzzle. It's so much harder to silo yourself and say like, what do I want to write? I am in complete control. What do I want to talk about? What do I need to express? And that was, it was definitely a challenge, but like the moment I started, it just, kind of poured out.
Was it hard to write? It doesn't sound like this is a comedy record by any means,
No,
right? You know what I
I
mean?
do
Like,
have a hard time not adding kind of a smirk to what I do.
okay.
I don't know. I think, and I think there are people who use humor as a way to kind of deflect and a way to
Oh yeah.
separate themselves and be kind of ironic.
Mhm.
And for me, I feel like I use humor earnestly. I mean, I would be being a fake version of myself if I wasn't a little silly or just a little funny. I think a lot about, for example, like the music of Ben Folds, which is
Oh
like
yeah.
at times there's stuff that's like really kind of like clever and funny and humorous, but it's not, you wouldn't call it a comedy record.
No, not
But
by
what's
any means.
funny is I think a lot of my influences are comedy musicians, like I loved Flight of the Conchords, although I wouldn't call them an influence here, but certainly Tim Minchin.
Oh,
uh,
I've had him on my podcast. That guy's insanely good.
I love him. I mean, and he is, I like when people ask us, Yoav and I, in interviews, like, hey, what are your influences? Tim Minchin's always on my list
That's
because I think,
awesome.
he is, yes, he's funny and he's doing a lot of what he does to be funny, but his music is still profoundly beautiful and profoundly personal too.
Mhm.
Like there are songs that he does, just because in service of a joke, but a lot of his best stuff is a commentary on himself. And I think you find that in all comedy. There are comics who make jokes for the joke, and there are comics who feel like they are expressing something personal on stage.
Yeah, what was the record he put out? He put out an album. Oh, Apart Together. Was that it? There was one that I think it was Apart Together. And it's like this big, like it's like a cinematic record, but it's so personal. It's not funny at all. I mean, he gets
Yeah,
up but the album and his songwriting is insane. And like when I interviewed him, he was next to a piano and he's just like, "Oh yeah, I'll come up with something that's like just how quick is on keys." I was like, "Damn, like this is crazy." Because
yeah.
I
I
just
mean,
knew him as a comedian.
absolutely. And I mean, like the thing is, it's like, it's Steve Martin with the banjo. Like Tim,
Oh
I mean,
yeah, sure.
obviously, Tim Minchin, his career is much more dependent on his piano than Steve Martin is on the banjo. But like here you have a person who, for a living is being funny for you, but like is just a prodigious artist with their instrument.
Hmm. No, 100%. When it comes to like this album, was it hard to, kind of present that vulnerable side of you, just knowing kind of your background as far as, the comedy and everything else that you've kind of done throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, earnestness, I think this is like a general, maybe millennial problem. I feel like as a generation, I feel like millennials are defined by irony and this
Yeah.
kind of like, separating yourself and like, oh, I can't really appear to care. It's like,
Right.
that like, I mean, I don't know where that comes from. Certainly, many seasons of South Park can't have helped making caring look stupid.
Right. Right.
But I think there it's tough to be like, hey, you know, here I am it feels weird. It feels like there are elements of this that feel like kind of embarrassing, of like, oh, here's a music video and here's me in it. Here I go.
Right.
Here I go doing my song. And I think actually that was one of the things I tried to do with the music video, the first one that I released, called Rooftop, which I part of it was like, let me just kind of get this out of the way and like be a little embarrassing. And in that music video, like I am like very like with a serious face doing some like dance moves and stuff in a way that is like clearly like I get it. It is weird and embarrassing to do this.
Right. And that's like, it's funny how you mentioned millennials, like how I feel the same way, or it's like I'll make fun of myself before somebody else does, or like even like the fact of getting on like TikTok and just being like, oh, hey, like that's just so cringy to me. But like you Gen Z and onward, it's like that's just life. Like it's weird. I mean, for me at least.
Absolutely. Like I think, for a time people were saying, oh, access to technology is going to be a defining generational difference. And I don't think it is, but I do think access to cameras is a major generational difference. And I think the idea that Gen Z sort of takes for granted, like, yeah, I'm going to be on camera all the time, is a very different approach where there is a lot less self-consciousness around like, oh my God, here I am.
Right.
I think you can see that someone, not to like talk about a post I saw online.
Why not?
Someone posted like, man, why does footage of high schoolers from the 90s and 80s and early 2000s, why does it all look so different in a way that is like almost impossible to define? And it's because these are people who are not used to being on camera. And I think you see this too in like the way you see this in humor, especially. And obviously, like I pay a lot of attention to that because I think humor is at its best, a reflection of the zeitgeist. And at its worst, a bunch of like stubborn people being like, why does the zeitgeist change? Comedy should stay the same.
Right.
But, I think you see too in older content, you'll have gags where like someone, like there's a news reporter on camera and there's a person in the background just kind of like.
Yeah, like the Zoom thing that was like that video went viral.
Yeah. Novelty.
Right.
And now that's a different gag. Now it is someone entitled walking into frame, grabbing the microphone, saying, "Hey, what's up?" It's a different gag now because that's the gag that makes sense now because people know what it feels like to be on camera because everyone's always on camera all the time.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to think about it that way. I never even really put it in perspective where it's like there's a generation of kids that are all they know is being on camera. Whereas totally. Like I remember hearing my own voice I used to skateboard and like watching myself like when we'd film little videos. I'm like, God, this is like so bad. Like, because you just have no real like benchmark of what you're like, what you sound like or whatever. I mean, it took me, I came from doing terrestrial radio for 15 or 17 years. So like that whole bridge and like now people are like, I mean, radio is just not even a thing really anymore, but like that whole like era and that whole medium and that all that media is just kind of like so distant to these kids.
Yeah. There's no more popping into frame and being like, "Hi, mom." Like you have Instagram for that. You can FaceTime your mom.
Right. Oh, that's so brilliant. But so with this EP, are you going to do any sort of like live? I mean, not
so
videos, but like perform it on anywhere.
So sorry to interrupt, fellas. Oh, sorry. Do we think we can do like one more question and then hop off? Just because we're a little bit over time.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sure. Of course.
Sorry to interrupt. Appreciate you both.
Oh yeah. Let me.
Okay.
Well, can I ask you a different question?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. All right. So, my last question is always the same. I want to know if you have any advice for aspiring artists.
Absolutely. And my advice, I've been asked this question a lot in a lot of different fields. Like I've been asked like, oh, how do I be a voiceover actor? How do I be a screenwriter? And it's the same answer every single time. And because it's an answer I don't hear a lot of people give, and it's location. I think so many people say like, like give good advice, write a little bit every day. Like you have to like stick with it. Don't let rejection get you down. All of that stuff, coming up with good work habits. But location is so fundamentally important. You have to be where the work is. You have to be where the industry is. Because, like as much as people want to believe like, hey, I can get found on social media tomorrow, that's betting on winning the lottery. You need to be where the action is. And so my number one piece of advice across several industries has always been, you have to be where it's happening. Bringing it backward.